so bad it's making my head grow and I'm about to explode! Clean up on aisle 1. We return to the series with some horror music. Yeah, for whatever reason, this first scene featured music from whenever the antagonists were planning something bad. Like what? Is Nagisa just eating some chips supposed to conjure up images of her committing acts of evil? Okay, never mind. Of course, they didn't just switch over to plain old comedy when Ryota tried to do the thing, but still, a pretty weird way of reintroducing us into the show when they could have just have opened with this bit of Nagisa looking at her broken toys. It actually would have been an effective way of both highlighting how peaceful things had become since the end of the first season, and remind the audience of the melancholic resolution of the fairies needing to go into hibernation as a result. Whatever, that piece would soon start to fade, but first we got a remixed opening. And this is what I will admit is maybe one of the more minor issues, but still an issue with this show. The fact that there are some good elements of a sequel here, though it is a little too extra at times. This is probably best highlighted by the NHK Precure popularity polls from back in 2019, when they ranked the top 50 songs in the franchise, and this opening actually ranked 4 spaces below its original, which of course took the top spot. Now, obviously, 5th is still a high and somewhat deserved ranking, but when you look at the numbers in between those two, you'll find the Yes 5 seasons and Go Go's opening actually overtook its original. This is likely due to the fact that the 2 seasons had completely different openings, and people just preferred the one from the sequel. Meanwhile, with the Max Heart version of Dancing Futari, it just kind of has to be compared with the original. And while it still keeps most of the iconic beats from the original, it also adds in some unnecessarily loud new instruments that kind of throw off the great melody they had going. I don't know, it just doesn't feel quite as memorable when it's just louder and in your face, rather than the inviting tones of the original that eased you into the ass-kicking magical girls. Add in the very superfluous Maksu Hato lyrics, and you just end up throwing the whole flow of the song off. Sure, it can be kind of epic when you use it to open up a big action sequence, but otherwise, it's more distracting than anything else. Again, it's still a great song in its own right, but ultimately, I do agree with these rankings that say that the original hands down beats it, based entirely on the simple is best principle. Conversely though, I do think the visuals here are kind of better than the original. I mean, for one thing, obviously we got some new, more dynamic sequences from our old buddy Tatsuo Yamada, but I also like the fact that Honaka is more in on the action in this version. Sure, we are missing some of the more slice-of-life sequences of the Precure that also did define the franchise, as well as this iconic shot, but at the same time, I do think it's more important to have sequences of the two working together, which ended up producing this kind of underrated shot of the two reaching out to each other mid-air, and of course this now overused shot that just keeps getting added onto. Not to mention, it also has far less superfluous sequences, like this bit of all of the Verone students suddenly taking part in a marathon, and instead hinted at the Precure's goals of the season, which we'll get into in just a bit, and this epic shot of the big bad towering over the earth to really highlight the threat they posed. It was also intercut with shots of a new important character for the season, who again we'll get into in just a bit. Still, overall, while I wouldn't say it's nearly as iconic as its original, this is still a solid enough sequel opening, and at best, basically a side grade, and at worst, just slightly less memorable. Anyway, in the Garden of Light, don't you know that I love you? The queen said that she was just gonna die. Yeah, as it turned out, yet again, at the very last minute, Jarky not only gave birth to another new entity, but also managed to morally wound the queen. Gotta give it to this guy, he finds more loopholes to escape through than some politicians. That said, yeah, while Jerky won't completely return the series, it is eye-rolling that somehow he'd still play a significant role here after being killed off twice now, and always coming back because of some last-minute twists. Like, we're almost reaching Sigma for Mega Man X levels of BS here. Anyway, to prevent her own complete destruction, the Queen stole from Jarky's playbook and broke herself off into the MacGuffins of the season, as well as a new heroine, both of which Toei could just conveniently kind of bank off of. Meanwhile, the Precure start off their new school year with a callback to something from near the end of the previous season with the teacher's relationship status.
こう言っちゃなんだけど、私たちラブラブモード。
I mean, come on, when you have to brag this much about your relationships, you might want to wipe off some of that sugarcoating. The Precure certainly weren't, as things were significantly changing for them now that they were middle school seniors with more responsibilities, like Nagisa becoming the captain of the lacrosse team. Little touches like this does make the show feel more like a proper sequel, where the characters have grown beyond where they started from as people, and not necessarily as the superheroines, though that could also be used as a display of growth. The most important thing for a show like this is to show that the characters do get more responsibilities as the years go by. Or, you could just turn the clock back and negate any real adventures into adulthood. That works too. Back in the garden, the Elder exposited about what had happened to the Queen. Essentially, aspects of her personality had split off into 12 little fairies called the Heartiels, and vessels that held her life and heart. Thus, it would be the Precura's job to bring them all back together. No, he's saying the right thing. I think the old dude just really likes his celebrity boxing. Not too surprisingly, the remnants of the Dotsu Zone started to launch a new attack, and yeah, while this is some pretty typical mid-Mitsuru Aoyama animation here, I gotta give credit that this traffic-like Zankenna has a pretty awesome design. And on that note, Meppo and Mippo reawakened, showing off some new toys and costume designs for their partners. Yeah, but the higher-ups do want to milk this cash cow until the bitter end. Anyway, said new costumes were okay, not too dissimilar from their original forms, but kind of like the opening, they were an example of less was more. Honoka was mostly the same, with just a few more bits of color, like her center brooch now being a separate blue, which I legit like, but I kinda preferred the smaller phone strap rather than this big heart clip thing. Meanwhile, Nagisa got a few more changes. Again, a few more accents of color, mostly a little more pink, that does look good, though I do prefer the smaller bow on her original outfit. Though the most notable change was probably her stomach now just being covered up. Yeah, apparently that of all things was one of the biggest issues some parents, most likely some Karens, had with the show. As opposed to some of the darker themes involving stuff like oppression or some of the more violent fights in the show. Hell, with the power of hindsight, it makes it even more ridiculous considering some of the far more revealing and form-fitting outfits we got in later years. Now, personally, I did think Nagisa showing off her stomach worked for her more athletic tomboy personality, and worked as a nice contrast to the more uptight Honoka, but whatever, these second designs were okay, and I could absolutely understand people preferring them over the originals. So I think I'll just stick with calling these side grades rather than full-on up or downgrades in terms of design at least. In story, they were outright stated to be much stronger, which thankfully was displayed through an upgraded version of the marble screw, which, yeah, legit looked really good, and was a good addition to the original stock animation. Just something as simple as this new wind-up and the Precure being pushed back by their own attack just made it feel that much more impactful. Good stuff. Later, Nagisa arrived home to find the Elder and Wisdom just casually waiting for her to exposit the plot of the season, along with... What happened to all my Tylenol? But yeah, they explained the concept of the Heartiels, and like a tutorial in a Pokemon game, they were just given their first collectible, in the form of Seikun, who, worth mentioning, on top of sharing the same VA as Yoshimi-sensei, would also go on to voice Komachi of the S5 team. The episode ended with a nice shot of this mystery girl and a mystery boy going to live with the actual best returning characters in the show, yes, more so than the Precure, fight me. But yeah, a solid enough first episode for the second season to establish a new status quo, so may as well close things out with a nice little ending theme that...
No, sir, I didn't like it.
Yeah, again, looking at that song ranking list, there's probably a good reason why this one wasn't listed anywhere on it. I mean, for one thing, the visuals here were just boring, with mostly just clips from the episode we just watched being played on some still backgrounds. And the song, Muri Muri Arinai Janai, named after Nagisa's catchphrase, was mid at best and pretty annoying at worst. I mean, I won't outright say I hated it, but the bubblier beats were just not to my taste personally, and it lacked any real punch to it. I know Mayumi Gojo can and will do much better with this franchise, considering what she did before and after this at least. The second episode just straight up opened with the mystery girl, who they rightfully deem embarked to try and hide her connection with the Queen of Light. That said, for a being that was made from the big good of the series, she did seem to mind in partaking in some casual brainwashing.
私のいとこなんだ。
Guess this has always been a thing with the Precure franchise. Anyway, as it turned out, the Prism Stones, aka last season's MacGuffins, were maintaining the Garden of Light in a nice callback that again highlighted the accomplishments of the previous season, like a good sequel should. However, they couldn't maintain it forever, so the Precure had to pull a highlight and try to glue the fairies back together before a new form of darkness could replace King Jark. Hearing this, Sikun unfortunately tried to take the initiative and find the other Hearty Elves, forcing the Precure to chase her. As a result, they did run into the mystery girl, who had named herself Hikari as the Queen's spirit, had referred to her as the light that will guide everyone.
あなたたちのこと知ってるような気がする。ずっとずっと前から。
Did you two happen to grow up with Sega consoles? Because if you say you're a Nintendo kid, I swear to God. And yet, even though pretty much everything had already been revealed to us, the audience, they still tried to maintain the mysterious act for the Precure because we gotta fulfill that 6 Ranger quota for this character, especially since she is going to be the first for this franchise. This would continue into the next day at school when she utilized Akane's money to enroll as a freshman at Verona Academy. I mean, okay, to be fair, Hikari didn't completely mooch off this lady for her tuition, as she did help out at her food truck, and even managed to expand it with some new items. Granted, I'm not sure if it was worth the brain damage she was likely inflicting on this poor lady, but let's not focus on that too much. She did manage to make a good first impression with Nagisa by giving her some very unfortunate-looking chocolate ice cream. Later, the Precure reunited with Sikun, who claimed that she had found the queen. Gee, I wonder where. But no time to think about that, as it was time to introduce our first new general of the season.
お前たちが伝説の戦士プリキュアか。
And I will defeat her with my affiliate pop-ups! I really should cover the Neptune franchise one of these days. Also, worth mentioning that this VA also does the voices for the regular Sakena, and I gotta say, he has a really nice voice that shouldn't be distorted as much as it is with these guys. Anyway, after a really short, underwhelming first fight with this guy, he along with the other generals gathered at the Darkseid's old mansion and around the Mystery Boy. The third episode opened with Mepple of all characters being the voice of reason amongst all the fairies.
Huh?
No, Polun, the term is kakusei if you want to do the whole shonen protagonist thing, and God, I'm such a weeb. But yeah, this was, unfortunately, a bit more of a fairy-focused episode, with both Polun trying to unlock his chakra, while the others were leeching off the Misumi family, and trying to hide from them.
ナミさんとホナミさんに顔向けが。
誰それ?
The hookers I called in last night. Wait, why wasn't I invited? This was at least somewhat made up for with some good characterization for Hikari, who was trying to grip her head around the fact that she was essentially a freshly born human in the body of an adolescent girl. And unlike the newborn 20-year-old, they did take it a little more seriously, with her realizing that she was unable to experience many things her peers had gone through, like elementary school and field trips, basically meaning that she didn't even understand the concept of recreation, and thus had a desire to experience everything she could. Legit interesting stuff. Later, the Precure had to track down Polun once again, after he managed to sneak away from Mepple. Fortunately, they wouldn't have too much trouble, as they had the power of lazy jump cuts by their side. yeah, worth mentioning that this season has a few production issues, as if some of the inconsistent faces throughout this episode wasn't a big enough clue. Anyway, the so-called Prince of Light ran to Hikari, and as a result, she tried to learn more about the little fairy, but ended up learning more about her senpai when they had to deal with a random monster encounter. And once again, the fight here was really underwhelming. Like, we can't show the whole thing, but just this whole tug-of-war sequence with the Zakena was embarrassingly slow, and just lacked any real impact. Like, I know we complained a lot about the early fights in the previous season, but at least the hits there felt like they made proper contact. Anyway, the episode ended with the Precure just finding Polun and Sikun, who, yeah, spent the episode trying to find the other Hardtails again, and obviously it didn't amount to much of anything. The fourth episode opened with Nagisa working on an art project that managed to attract a few critics.
これは絶対ゴミの山です。
Funny, that doesn't look like Disneyland. Also, don't you just love how it's the voice of Komachi that's calling something a pile of trash? Or it's just me? Well, anyway, understandably getting tired of her new roommates, Nagisa decided to move all of the fairies to Honoka's house, which did make sense, as it was pretty much a palace with a lot more places that they could hide from her grandmother, who was also heavily implied to already be in on the magical girl stuff, so yeah, it actually worked out really well. And thankfully, after we got another repetitive bit of Sikun trying to run off on her own, we cut to easily the best part of these early episodes, the mystery boy and the butler's Akenas. Seriously, these characters were legit hilarious with their Des de Menace antics, and even just the very fact that apparently the forces of evil were ordering toys for this kid from Amazon. It's the kind of more laid-back and comical quote-unquote villain interactions that I do like to see in my shows. The next day, Nagisa turned in her art project.
色使いは綺麗ね。あら？鶏って眉毛があったかしら？
Lady, have you not seen Chicken Little? Because if you haven't, I really wouldn't blame you. And they were later confronted by Hikari.
優しい声が教えてくれた。渚さんの描いた鳥の絵が。
Oh, a picture of a chicken told you all of that. I see. But yeah, of course, she kept on acting all cryptic and mysterious just to build to the very obvious reveal for our main duel. All the while, the fairies kept on having their plot sensors going off, which, like a lot of things in the show, was starting to get a little repetitive by this point. Thankfully, the actual plot did start to move during the next Monster of the Week fight, which of course turned out to be with the chicken statue, and goddammit, why did the Zakena always have to have the best designs? But yeah, the two were forced to transform in front of Hikari, which would have been a bigger detail if she hadn't already seen them change in the last episode, but whatever. We also got an exciting fight with Circulus. If you think punching a wall is engaging. Yeah, aside from the stock animations, you can really tell that some of the general animation production, especially in these first 4 episodes, felt pretty damn rushed. I mean, I get that they're trying to build up this villain as a legit threat who the Precure have to do some level grinding to beat, but it doesn't come across well when it looks like our superheroines are punching him with as much force as wet noodles. And sure, some of that you could blame on the general skill sets of some of these animators. I think Hiroyuki Kawano always worked better on more slice-of-life shows like Ojama Shotoremi. However, knowing that this show, like the second half of the original series, was kind of rushed into production, it does end up highlighting how slap-chop some of this fight choreography was, if you could even call it that. Anyway, after being essentially bitch-slapped into submission, Polun and his awkward running animation decided to partner up with the girl who he had just barely gotten to even know. I mean, yes, obviously Hikari has her connections with the queen, but this still does feel like a bit of a Deus Ex Machina. This continued right into the next episode, where Polun, of course, coxated into a new toy, and Hikari became the first additional hero for this franchise, Shiny Luminance, 5 episodes pretty early into the series. Unless you count the original series, then this would actually be kind of a pretty late appearance, but whatever, semantics. Circula tried to take out the new superheroine early on.
Come on! Nani?
Save that for when someone activates the Clear Mind. Thankfully, the animation did improve in this one, with one of the true legends of this franchise, Toshie Kawamura, taking the rings. As a result, it actually looked like Nagisa and Honoka were trying to hit this guy, but were appropriately being overwhelmed. We even got an impressive bit when the Zakena rejoined the fight and actually ended up roaring through a dust cloud it had created. Pretty cool stuff. Thus, it also felt like a good time as any to unleash a new finisher. And seriously, Yoshikazu Tomita and Tatsuo Yamada really should be considered the co-MVPs of this show, as they really put their all into these sequences that really get across the sheer impact of these attacks. Again, the wind-up is what really makes it, on top of some of these cool effects that turn the Zakena into a petrified rainbow. That's legit kind of creative to say the least. Also, yes, this was from the first 7 minutes of this episode after they directly continued from the previous one. I actually kind of like this format, as it does allow for a little more flexibility in the pacing of these episodes, and cliffhangers by their very nature do motivate the viewers to come back the following week. Obviously, they shouldn't overdo it or apply it poorly, which we'll even kind of see in just a little bit. But if the writers really don't want to have the Precures losing by the end, then just interrupting the fight and continue it next week isn't a bad compromise. Anyway, the Precure later confirmed that Hikari was indeed the life of the queen, and this thankfully forced Wisdom and the Elder to return to the garden to do some research, as the show was starting to get a little crowded. That said, it also led to the characters just kind of repeating a lot of things we had already established about this whole queen situation, which included a barrage of flashbacks even from this very episode. You'd almost think this is supposed to be a recap episode, but we're only like 5 episodes in. This again kind of highlights how they were very likely going into this sequel without as many solid plans as the latter half of the first season, where they at least had some leftover concepts to work with. The plot did advance a little when the Precure just directly asked Hikari who she was.
Queen なの? Queen? 私が?
Yes, queen.
Don't start, we get enough of that with Laura. And again, they just kinda skated around these questions, though to be fair, this also did kind of act as a means of characterization for Hikari, who was understandably suffering from a little sensory overload. How effective of a character she'd end up being for the show is a discussion for later, but for now, I get what they're trying to do here. Anyway, we then just kind of got our fight of the episode when Circulus appeared out of nowhere, and the freshly branded trio engaged him in another decent fight, again mostly thanks to Kawamura. Okay, so I guess we're done here, so farewell for now my friends and all that junk, and wait, why isn't that red bar fully filled? I mean, come on, with grade A dialogue like this.
本体の恐ろしさを見せてやる。
伝説の戦士の力を見せてあげる!
How could you not want to see this show prematurely end? Okay, but seriously, this conceptually wouldn't have been a bad way to end the episode if there had been actual follow-up in the next. And what sort of follow-up did we get? Yeah, seriously, even though they referenced that previous fight several times throughout this episode, they never actually bothered to show how it resolved. I guess we're supposed to assume the Precure drove off Circulus, even though he's been portrayed as being incredibly powerful and hard to beat, and he doesn't even look all that worse for wear, and in fact doesn't even look all that upset, so should we assume that he won and yet didn't finish them off, or what?
I don't know!
Fortunately, we did get at least some relief from all of these unanswered questions with the introduction of one of the more liked baddies of this season, Uraganos. Just little wholesome scenes like that did give him a lot more characterization than some of his cohorts of this season, as well as made you realize this guy was basically a Proto Bunbee, with the only thing really missing being this actor's many ad-libs for this character. Anyway, the Precure spent their day off making some sweets with Granny Sanai, specifically batamochi, which are basically sweet rice balls covered in some sweet coating to make them like candy.
そういえばさ、ぼたもちってのはおはぎとどう違うの?
Well, for one thing, you don't put needles in botamochi. Granted, I'm pretty sure the amounts of sugars and carbs Nagisa ate here were far deadlier than any crazy yandere from the booties. And thankfully, they would share some of their extra mochi with Hikari, who, as it just so happened, was asked by Akane to do some grocery shopping and was in need of some guides. She did this mostly to drive Hikari away, as she needs to discuss something with this guy who will become a little more important later. Anyway, our heroines made their way to the department store, where you could usually find supermarkets in the basement floors, but while Nagisa and Honoka were looking at the directory, Hikari ended up going upstairs to retrieve a balloon for a kid. As a result, she got lost, though to her credit, she did make the right choice in trying to get to the supermarket, as at least that way, the three of them would have a common location that they should all be going to, and therefore be able to regroup at. However, Hikari didn't know about the whole basement thing like most gaijin would, like me, and the clerks at the department store were of no help. Like seriously, wouldn't at least one of them point her to the elevator and tell her to go down to the basement? It's just kind of common freaking courtesy. But then, I guess we could get this cheesy bit of Hikari returning the balloon, and only then did she learn about the supermarket from the mother of the kid. And from there, the original duo, who didn't even think about going down to the supermarket because Hikari might and now was there, but rather they need to be guided there by Siku.
Oh, I get it!
Anyway, Hikari managed to find most of the ingredients on her own, and they just needed some octopus for last. Dude, why would you assume the little girl would want the live product? You'd think she could recreate that one scene from Old Boy that we can't really show here, otherwise we get demonetized, and yet you can absolutely find that scene here on YouTube, so yeah, try and make that make sense. Also, if you expected me to do a tentacle hentai joke... I mean, again, I really can't add anything. But yeah, Urugano's first fight was actually pretty decent, thanks to some relatively decent animation. I mean, at least I can actually make out what's going on. And we even got some legit property damage. Hope those cars were insured. Additionally, the dude and his epic stash did come off as an intimidating threat on first impression, allowing for even Polun to have an admirable heroic moment to save Hikari. Said extra heroine really didn't do much in this battle other than her usual finisher buff, but overall at least this was a slight step above other fights. Anyway, the episode ended with our heroines completing their little shopping trip, and another heart TL just kind of coming out of nowhere. Episode 7 opened with another one of Koyasu, Mr. Misumi's dad jokes after his wife said that she was going to be away for the weekend at class reunion. This is a Yoshimi Narita episode, isn't it? Yeah, you can always tell when the characters start acting like they're on crack. Having been tasked with taking care of their home while their parents were gone, Nagisa of course set a good example for her little brother by lying around and making him do most of the work. Yeah, Ryota, you could probably talk back to her a little more, especially considering you just went through a hell of a growth spurt there. Also, is that a knockoff Kamen Rider Hibiki, which was playing during the same season as this was? Better enjoy that show while you still can, Nagisa, because if you thought your show declined during its second half, oh boy. It really says something when even the villains ended up having the more wholesome family dynamic. Of course, they still did the typical baddie fare, like playing out their next evil scheme and wait, rewind that a little. Huh, a single frame of the outside of Nagisa's apartment was just kind of spliced in there. I mean, to be fair, I'm not sure if there's a problem with the video file I got, but I think I also saw a similar error later in the episode, so yeah, someone fell asleep in the editing room. I mean, come on, y'all shouldn't be as sloppy as like some 2-bit YouTuber who sometimes forgets to put his audio ending. Well, anyway, this did at least lead into my favorite running gag of the show.
人の話を最後まで聞け。
I don't know, dude. I think Syndrome has the right idea.
You sly dog! You got me monologuing!
Meanwhile, to prove that she doesn't need to go on Are You Smarter Than a 5th Grader, anyone remember that show? Nagisa decided to get some quick tutoring from Honoka when Ryota asked for some help with his homework. Because, yeah, that makes sense. I'm sure the kid would be willing to wait around while his sister asked someone else for help. Whatever, it wasn't all that important. What should have been a little more important was looking for the other hardtails, like the one that was introduced just in the last episode, and Siku didn't bother to keep track of him. I mean, granted, they were all trying to gather in one location, the foundation of the Queen's heart, which, yeah, was pretty damn vague, so they just went back to Nagisa's caretaking plot.
冷凍食品買ってレンジでインスタントがあるしどうして
Also, have you even tried instant miso soup? It's really good and pretty decently priced. However, the waifu wasn't gonna stand for her husbando not even trying to be somewhat independent, so Honoka encouraged her to do some shopping and make something for her father and brother. And as it just so happened, Akane was also giving Hikari a crash course in snack making, which did lead into a good speech about the emotional benefits of making foods for others, which was the whole reason she even started up a food truck. Good stuff that would even serve as the foundation for a couple of future seasons. Well, one, the other one is kind of iffy. Anyway, this generated some motivation in Nagisa, leading to passion showing himself, so yeah, at least this kind of feels like they earned this new heart TL from learning the lesson of the day, so good stuff. But can we also get a good fight with this episode? Why, yes we can, as once again they brought in Tatsuo Yamada, the dude who just goes ham in on some of these sequences, by embracing some much more flexible cartoony animation of freaking Looney Tunes, along with all of the violence that entails. Helps that I think at least the grand majority of this fight was all of his stuff. As a result, it also did make Hikari's rescue at the end all the more dramatic. Though yeah, the Precure once again were in trouble, so Hikari revealed that while she was mostly a cleric with very few offensive capabilities, she also did have some effective debuffs in her skill set. Now, just imagine a character who's also a fighter and yet also has all of those abilities, but come on, that would just be ridiculous, am I right? Anyway, since it was basically a targeted Zawaldo, the Precure were able to escape from their enemy's grasp and quickly end the fight. And the episode itself ended with some seeds being sowed for the next episode, and one of the biggest wah-wah-wahs possible with Nagisa botching up her family's dinner. A good episode overall with some great animation, and even a good lesson about taking pride in challenging yourself to do something you normally wouldn't, even if the results do turn out kind of crappy. Could have used a little less jumping around all the different subplots, but I guess with a show like this, just take the little victories you can. Episode 8 immediately followed up on one of those subplots that actually has been subtly built up over the past few episodes, with Akane considering a job offer from her former underclassman Nakao. It was actually a pretty intriguing little storyline with some more mature themes, like how in spite it seemed like she was making bank, her food truck seemed to be at least a little in the red, and with a sudden additional mouth to feed and tuition to pay, going back to a better paying desk job might have been for the best. Again, I really like this sort of storytelling where a lot of stuff is more implied rather than outright stated. Just because it's a kids show doesn't mean your audience won't be able to pick up on some of this stuff. Though on that note, I'm not against some of these more youthful elements either. Okay, man, you kind of wish you could have done that as a kid. Also, goddamn is Uragano's wholesome. Back with the single mom and her goddess Daru, it was clear that both sides were holding things back, as even the fairy who couldn't play Shitori properly picked up on. Again, really good, subtle storytelling that I appreciate. It certainly helps to balance out some of the more over-the-top moments in this episode. Well, credit to Nagisa, she's just as terrifying as that thing. And of course, as soon as I praised the plushie a little, Polun went right back to being his annoying little self and was rightfully chewed out by Nagisa, who I mean, yeah, there was some decently complex reasoning behind it, with him wanting to be scolded by someone, as at least it meant they were paying attention to him, and not emotionally distancing themselves from everyone like Hikari was doing. But still, when you deliver it like that, it does come off like...
あれかしら意地悪とか痛いこととかされると気持ちよくなってしまうみ
Regardless, we did get another good lesson of the day with Honoka telling Hikari to just be herself and things should work out in some shape or form, like a late blooming cherry blossom. Good stuff that really does remind you of how much of a great lead Honoka was in... wait. Well, anyway, Akane did eventually come to her decision about where or not to keep her food truck, thanks to Hikari reminding her of what was important in her fake daughter. Yeah, as a reminder, she was basically brainwashed into accepting Hikari into her life, but I think the point is that even a lie can eventually become its own truth, as they did manage to form an actual bond. How genuine it was is up for debate, but still cute stuff. Thus, Akane gave her answer to Nakao.
頑張ろう。
じゃあ、
あんたはあんたの道を。私は
Okay, lady, for future reference, dick move. Like, they literally tried to make it as flowery as possible, but in most normal circumstances, I think grasping each other's hands is a sign of acceptance, not rejection, just saying. No, well, at least the dude might get something beneficial later.
もう一つのお願いの方は。
時間ないって言ってたよね。続きは歩きながら。
My man!
From there, the Precure once again went to look for a wandering Polun, and then we just kind of went into the fight of the episode. Yeah, I guess this was also a thing with this franchise. Anyway, it was just an okay fight. I mean, I'll give it points for having a direct fight with General and Uraganos, who did come off as a decent threat by literally just walking through our heroines, but some of these angles were just claustrophobic and hard to get a read on like an action game with bad camera angles. That said, I didn't mind it too much, as the focus was clearly more on developing the partnership between Polud and Hikari, with the latter finally starting to actually pay attention to the little guy, and even scold him when he made a mess in the food truck. Honestly, a really good lesson about how a scolding from a truly loved one is often a sign that they at least care. In turn, Hikari got a good showing defending the food truck from a rampaging big red guy, who was then blown away by the original duel. Now, of course, not every scolding should be viewed as a positive, and in general, kids should try to behave themselves, but it's still a nice message that a good parental figure will show you a little tough love from time to time. That said, if you're not a loved one, well, sometimes it's better to just run, especially if you're mistakenly blamed for making a mess like Nagisa. I feel like I need to keep those guys from SpongeBob on standby. The following episode kind of continued the search for the Hardtails, with very minor and kind of repeated bits of world building on how they could track the little fairies. The biggest takeaway was that the Queen's heart and life would inevitably cross paths. More importantly for this particular episode was them furthering the subplot of Nagisa and Honoka having become the leaders of their respective clubs. Naturally, both cures had some growing pains to go through, but with pretty much opposite issues. For Nagisa, she was a bit too much of a softie when it came to leading a competitive lacrosse team by not reprimanding some of their slacking teammates a little more. Conversely, Honoka was supposedly being too harsh when one of their lab members knocked over a glass beaker with clearly volatile chemicals. Yeah, I'm kind of siding with Honoka on this one. That said, I do understand what they're trying to do here, and even kind of really like it. For one thing, they were kind of calling back to some of the more subversive traits of our leads, with our original duel actually being the inverse of what their surface level traits suggested, with Nagisa being the sensitive and kind of wimpy teammate, while Honoka was the assertive, borderline aggressive one. And secondly, it was showing the sort of growth both needed to go through now that they had more non-Precure related responsibilities. Anyway, the Beaker Breaker was considering quitting the club, which honestly probably would have been better for everyone, but Yuriko, who I guess was now Honoka's vice president or something, went to talk things out with her. More importantly for Honoka herself, her parents were coming in for her birthday. Meanwhile, the Zakena family were again being one of the best parts of the show, whilst also introducing another evil general.
相変わらずだね、裏が。
Damn, Ron's mom was hot in her younger years. Back with Honoka, after her parents got in, they went to a fancy little French restaurant for her birthday dinner. There, they clearly picked up on their daughter having issues with her science club, and yet her dad made this joke.
部活の時にでもみんなで食べれば。冗談冗談。
Haha, my daughter has no friends. Yeah, dude, as someone who's a bit of a connoisseur of dad jokes, that was mid. Still, that aside, they were being supportive and nice parents. At the same time, we were introduced to another Hardtail in Harmony, and oh look, another ES5VA, and appropriate enough, it's the fairy. No, and also, Hikari and Nagisa were shopping for gifts for Honoka. Also, Yuriko was talking things out with that club member. Yeah, if it sounds like a lot of things are happening at once, they are, but eventually, they did start to converge once Viblis launched an attack at the department store that they all just so happened to be at. She introduced herself to the Cures.
安心しな。これ以上新しいのには出くわさない。あんたたちはここで終わるから。
You could have just said it was for budgetary reasons, lady. Also, that's gonna turn out to be a total lie. Anyway, she made a Zakena out of electronics, and am I the only one who's just staring at this dude's microwave crotch? Because really, it was the only thing that stood out in this fight because it was just plain bad. The biggest issue was pretty obvious. It was just slow as all hell, resulting in none of these attacks feeling like they had any impact whatsoever. Nagisa's spin kick here was just ridiculous, and yet somehow even weaker looking than Mega Man's top spin. I mean, at least that attack could one-shot the final boss. But yeah, pretty crappy fight, so let's just move on to the end. So, after being forced to leave the nice French restaurant they were eating at, Honoka's party was relocated to Akane's food truck, which, to be fair, was at least better than McD's, and the episode ended with the Cures giving Honoka their gifts.
科学部の部長頑張ってもらおうと思って徹夜して作っちゃった
Well, she would fit in perfectly with the people of Nikosopa. Also, the Science Club subplot just kind of resolved itself, with Honoka acknowledging her mistakes, even though again I'd argue otherwise, and Nagisa relaying with her as a fellow club leader in a very nice moment. And the club member did apologize first, so yeah, I think this plot was actually resolved pretty nicely. This episode also saw the debut of a revamp for the second ending theme, which yeah, was a lot better, as it had some actual animation to it, including everyone just doing a random dance sequence out of nowhere. Yeah, same Yota, same. Still, it did highlight the Precure's everyday school life and how hectic it could be managing their club activities, so rather appropriate it debuted in this episode. I still don't care for the actual song, but at least it was a significant improvement visually. Following this, we got probably the most anticipated episode for Nagisa, a field trip to the cake factory.
一緒に作ろうよはいはいわかりました
Well, that's one for the out-of-context box. To be fair, she wasn't being a total glutton, and was going to try to learn how to make a cake for their new friend. Granted, 90% of her heart was still dedicated to getting her own sugar fix, but at least she was being nice. Meanwhile, our villains were being about as equally generous with their cakes.
じゃああんたのイチゴちょうだい。
いや、それはダメだ。
Okay, I now kind of like these guys, along with the Oreganos. Seriously, I know we've talked about this more than once on this channel, but why did Hirogaru Sky think it was a good idea to remove villain interactions like this? They're legit some of the funniest and sweetest moments in the show because they are villains who can show that they're more than just guys who create monsters of the week.
ミルクレープなんてどう？
Plus, they even have good taste. I mean, come on. Back with the Precure, you could kind of tell this was made before COVID. Then again, hasn't it always been standard practice to mask up at a food production facility? Well, whatever. I guess it wouldn't be able to hold back Nagisa's drool anyway. Also, Shiho would make for a good candy mascot. Surprisingly, they went into some pretty significant detail about cake production here, which was honestly pretty fascinating. I think some of the later food seasons should have taken notes. And remember, if you don't make that exclusively for him every day, he'll become a world-ending threat. But yeah, all in all, good stuff that highlighted the concept of many people working together in harmony to create a better product. How this applied to the Precure was pretty obvious, but still well told.
あれ一番大切なのは仲間同士のハーモニカなんだから
Yeah, sorry Nagisa, but I don't think Matt's gonna be able to bail you out on this one. Nagisa ended up giving chase to Harmonia after she just kind of appeared, and ironically put her out of Harmonica with Honoka. This proved to be a problem when Viblis attacked, and everyone just kind of fell from their sugar rushes. Yeah, seriously, try and tell me that's not what that looks like. Fortunately, they quickly regrouped to fight her and her oven Zakena in a decent fight, as there was just enough going on with the 2-on-2 fight that later became a 3-on-2. And things quickly wrapped up when Hikari joined in on the harmonica. The episode ended with them fully taking in the Proto Milk, and Nagisa giving Hikari the cake she promised.
なのか楽しみ
うんこだな。
うんこだわです
Episode 11 opened with Nagisa wrapping up a tough day of practice before their next tournament match. Understandably, she was feeling a little tense, so Honoka tried to help her.
大丈夫明日のリーグ戦に勝てるように
Hey, you two should kiss.
However, while her waifu was supportive, her team, specifically a problematic duo clearly designed just for this episode, weren't getting along the best. The next day, Akane encouraged Hikari to also support her friends. However, on her way out, she found something in her bag.
これ茜さんのですか
いや違うよ
A strange green stone. Hey, Superman, you have any idea what this could be? Zoops, why are you twitching? The game itself wasn't going well for Verone, again mostly because of the problematic duel. Thus, Hikari decided to be a good second waifu by running onto the field to give Nagisa her encouragement. I mean, yeah, she did during their halftime break, but stuff like that could get them DQ'd, just saying. Regardless, it was just enough, and this conflict was then just pretty much resolved. Yeah, seriously, they rushed the hell out of this, with Nagisa getting her team to do a standard group huddle gloveless, and this was somehow enough to get them all on the same wavelength, even though the biggest issue here was those two teammates who likely had deeper issues, but no, now they're all good.
Well, that it is.
Fortunately, the rest of the episode kind of made up for it, as after likely being kicked out of the stadium, Hikari was confronted by Viblis. Hello, Super. Yeah, I think we can build another good lawsuit against Toei for you. And as has been the common theme with this video, Tatsu Yamada proved that he was the MVP animator and made yet another excellent fight sequence that really makes you want to see an actual Ultraman/Precure crossover, you know, aside from whatever they did in Akiba Ranger. But yeah, just a great fight with some pretty creative attacks from the knockoff Eleking. I especially like this effect of the electric streams coming together to make one big zap cannon. Definitely one of Yamada's low-key best fight sequences with a lot of creative action, so highest of marks. Anyway, the episode ended with the original duel scolding Hikari for not calling them in sooner, even if Nagisa was in the middle of her game, which they won by the way. And the greenstone that had kept reappearing in her bag throughout this episode just suddenly turned into a brand new toy. Yeah, I think a lot of these Japanese dads wish they could carve this overpriced merchandise out of stone too. Anyway, it was called the Queen Cherek, whatever the hell that means, and acted as a collection device for the Heartiels. And with that, we entered into the final episode that we'll cover for this video. Damn it, Prowl, how did you get yourself killed again? And I'm just gonna assume the one who killed him was this dude. Anyway, the Precure learned that Akane had managed to secure a space at a local dairy farm where she'd be able to set up shop for her food truck. Thus, she invited our heroines as free labor, I mean, friends.
朝5時集合ね。朝の5時？ありえない。
Welcome to my everyday, Nagisa. Sure enough, our lead here slept through most of the drive to the farm, resulting in... Yeah, I got nothing. That was just really funny. The sound really made it. While Akane was staying up, the Precure had some free time to play with the farm animals, including a goat that pulled and rather violently mounted. Like, I legit feel bad for this poor animal.
あなた、ベルちゃんっていうの？
Well, now we know the backstory to Belle from Ultima Precure. A fairy pissed her off so much that she decided to become Greta Thunberg. Eventually, Akane managed to open up her shop after everyone else had, and also had products that the farm's usual patrons were more familiar with. Yeah, honestly a fairly realistic outcome that forced Akane's shop to try and adjust their menu with maybe some new items. And fortunately, Belle, who somehow managed to escape their enclosure, gave them the inspiration they needed. I've got it! Lamb chops! Nah, of course, they made a special takoyaki and ice cream combo meal that had the latter being formed into flowers, which I'm guessing was made using a cold stone, which is something I've actually seen and even tried, so yeah, I could totally understand them suddenly getting a lot of business out of nowhere. Though on that note, the last evil general of the season suddenly appeared and made his presence known to everyone, especially the animals. Quick, somebody call in your forger! Actually, surprisingly, even though there were stampeding cows, nobody got hurt. No, instead, all of that would be left in the hands of this dude. Oh my god, it's Hellshake Yano, we're all doomed! Okay, but seriously, Baldus managed to make a hell of an entrance by setting off so much chaos by his mere presence. He also managed to piss Hikari off so much that she was forced to briefly switch between her Neptune and Purple Heart voices.
自分たちの思い通りにしようとするあなたたちを 許すことはできない。
Anyway, they had a solid fight with him and his Silos Akane. Yeah, the animation wasn't as good as the previous episode, which to be fair was a pretty damn high bar, but again, I can appreciate some of this over-the-top action, with the Cures bouncing off this hay like they were missiles in Contra. And in the end, they managed to defeat it mostly thanks to Hikari's hearty action. However, this all turned out to be a part of Baldur's plans, as he mostly just wanted to see his enemies' power levels, in particular Hikari, who he managed to identify as the Queen's life. With that, he withdrew, and we end this review with one more wah wah wah, as the Cures outright forgot about Akane. Though to be fair, wouldn't they close down the farm after a stampede took place?
I don't know.
So, that was the first quarter of Precure Max Heart, and you know what? That was a solid start to a sequel series, which for this franchise is a pretty big blessing. I mean, yeah, I'm aware of the issues with this show coming up, but just based on the premise, they do have a very solid foundation here. Fundamentally, any good sequel should have any previous protagonists progress beyond where they were in a previous installment. Max Heart does accomplish this by having Nagisa and Honoka become the presidents of their respective clubs, leading to episodes where they do have to delegate their Senyu responsibilities and obligations, on top of being Precure again. It's good character growth that even shows the target audience that often, as you get older, new responsibilities will likely come and that you should be ready for them. Frankly, I think it's a lesson better told here than in Ultima Precure, as at least they're acting their age for the most part. Hell, even Polun, the brattiest fairy from the previous season, did show some legit growth. I'm actually kind of shocked that I didn't have as much to complain about with this character, and I'm sure nothing will come around to spoil that. Though on that note, his new partner in Hikari certainly helped in that development. Sure, she's not the most interesting character, but that's kind of the point. She's a blank slate who's still trying to get a grip on things. It does lead to some of her powers being kind of Deus Ex Machinas with how much the Queen's voice could guide her to use some really OP abilities, but it is at least balanced out by the fact that she is a pure supporter who can't really fight, instead of some kind of broken hybrid. Meanwhile, the villains are pretty fun. I mean, obviously, the Butlers Akane were the best carryover from the first series, but even the generals, especially Uraganos, are a lot of fun with just how much they work off each other, kind of bringing back the interactions of the Dark Seeds, but upping some of the comedy, which does work out for me, especially when it's balanced out with how much of a threat they actually posed. Though the fights we got with them were a bit of a mixed bag. I mean, obviously, anytime Tatsuo Yamada was involved, we were in for a good time, but other times, yeah, it was an overall downgrade, especially in comparison to how the previous series ended. How much this will affect the overall animation quality of the show remains to be seen, but at least there's nothing truly bad just yet. And aside from some meh episodes like the shopping trip and the Nagao subplot, this was an overall entertaining watch so far. Thanks for watching, and even though it's a little early, I do hope everyone has a Merry Christmas too. We don't have much planned out for the remainder of the year, but here's hoping for a fun new year in 2024, which depending on how certain things work out, we might see this channel open up to some different avenues. And until then though, farewell for now my friends, and if you'll excuse me, I think I'm gonna try playing on this thing after a long while. Oh god, I forgot how slow dial-up is.